Section 1. A Timeline to War. Key Moments from 1820 to 1861. The story of how the United States broke apart is a long and complex one, unfolding over several decades. It did not happen overnight. Instead, a series of events slowly pushed the North and the South further and further away until they could no longer find common ground. The period from 1820 to 1861 was filled with arguments, compromises, rising anger. Each new law and each new disagreement acted like a crack in the foundation of the nation. To understand the war, we must first look at the key moments that led the country down this dangerous path, a path that would ultimately end in a terrible and bloody conflict that reshaped the nation forever. This timeline provides a quick look at the most important steps on the road to the Civil War. It begins with an early attempt to solve the problem of slavery's expansion and ends with the first shots being fired. 1820, the Missouri Compromise. This law tried to keep a balance between free states and slave states. 1850, the Compromise of 1850. Another attempt to solve arguments over slavery in new lands. 1854, the Kansas-Nebraska Act. This law allowed settlers in new territories to decide for themselves if they wanted slavery. 1857, the Dred Scott Decision. The Supreme Court ruled African Americans were not citizens and had no rights. 1860, Abraham Lincoln's election. Lincoln's victory made Southern states feel they had lost their voice. Section 2. The Deepest Divide. Slavery as the central cause. At the very heart of the conflict that led to the Civil War was the institution of slavery. This was not just one issue among many. It was the fundamental overriding cause of the deep division between the North and the South. In the southern part of the country, the entire economy and way of life were built upon the labor of enslaved African Americans. Millions of people were held in bondage, forced to work on large farms called plantations. Cotton tobacco. Southern society viewed this system as normal and necessary for their prosperity, and they defended it fiercely against any criticism or threat of change. In the North, attitudes toward slavery were very different and had been changing over time. While slavery had existed in the North in the past, it was gradually abolished by the early 1800s. The Northern economy was based more on industry factories, small farms that did not rely on enslaved labor. A growing number of people in the North, known as abolitionists, came to believe that slavery was a great moral evil. They argued that it was a violation of the principles of liberty and justice that the nation was founded upon. This moral opposition to slavery grew stronger over the decades, creating a deep and passionate disagreement with the South. Beyond the central issue of slavery, the North and the South had become two very different economic and social worlds by the mid-1800s. The North was rapidly becoming an industrial society. Cities grew quickly as people moved there to work in factories, textiles, tools, other manufactured goods. Built on wage labor, workers paid for their time. The North was a transportation hub, thousands of miles of railroad tracks, connecting cities, connecting towns, easier to move goods, easier to move people, a dynamic, fast-paced society focused on commerce, manufacturing, innovation. In contrast, the South remained largely agricultural, dominated by large plantations. They grew cash crops, especially cotton. Cotton was hugely profitable, called king cotton, central to the Southern economy. Another significant cause of the Civil War was a long-running debate over the concept of states' rights. This is the idea that the individual states should have significant power and authority, separate from the federal or national government. Supporters of states' rights argued that the United States Constitution was a compact or agreement among the states, and therefore the states had the right to nullify or reject federal laws that they believed were unconstitutional. This idea was particularly popular in the South, where it was used as a powerful argument to defend the institution of slavery from interference by the national government. Southerners became increasingly fearful that the federal government, influenced by the growing anti-slavery movement in the North, would one day try to abolish slavery. They argued that the Constitution protected their property rights, and they considered enslaved people to be property. Therefore, any federal law that threatened slavery was, in their view, an overreach of federal power and a violation of their rights as states. The doctrine of states' rights became the primary legal and philosophical justification for protecting slavery. It allowed Southern leaders to frame their defense of slavery not as an endorsement of human bondage, but as a principled stand for constitutional liberty against a tyrannical central government. In the North, the view of the nation was quite different. Most Northerners, especially by the 1850s, believed in a strong and perpetual union. They argued that the Constitution had created a single, indivisible nation, not just a loose confederation of states. For decades, political leaders tried to manage the explosive issue of slavery through a series of compromises. The first major attempt was the Missouri Compromise of 1820. When Missouri applied to join the Union as a slave state, it threatened to upset the delicate balance of power in the Senate. The compromise allowed Missouri to enter as a slave state and admitted Maine as a free state. It kept the numbers even. It also drew a line across the Louisiana Territory, prohibiting slavery north of the 3630 parallel, except for Missouri. This worked for a time, but it was only temporary. By mid-century, the problem returned. After the war with Mexico, the U.S. gained vast new Western territory. That led to the Compromise of 1850, a package of 5 bills. It admitted California as a free state and imposed a much stricter Fugitive Slave Act. That law forced Northern citizens to help return escaped slaves, and Northern abolitionists hated it. The Compromise of 1850 pleased almost no one and deepened sectional resentment. The fragile peace shattered with the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. It overturned the Missouri Compromise and let settlers in Kansas and Nebraska decide for themselves popular sovereignty. The presidential election of 1860 was the final event that pushed the nation over the edge. The country was deeply divided, and the political parties reflected this split. The newly formed Republican Party nominated Abraham Lincoln as its candidate. The Republican platform was clear. It opposed the expansion of slavery into the Western territories. While the party did not call for the abolition of slavery where it already existed, its stance was seen as a direct threat by the South. Southern leaders made it very clear that if Lincoln were to win the election, they would consider it grounds for leaving the Union, an act known as secession. The Democratic Party, once a powerful national force, shattered into Northern and Southern factions over the issue of slavery. Southern Democrats demanded a candidate who would actively protect slavery in the territories. Northern Democrats supported the idea of popular sovereignty. This split resulted in 2 separate Democratic candidates, which divided their votes. A 4th candidate from the Constitutional Union Party also ran, further splitting the electorate. With his opposition divided, Abraham Lincoln won the election with a majority of the electoral votes, even though he did not win a single Southern state. His name did not even appear on the ballot in many parts of the South. For the South, Lincoln's election was the realization of their greatest fear, that they had lost all political power and influence in the national government. In December 1860, just a few weeks after the election, South Carolina became the first state to officially secede from the Union. Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas. The final decisive step from a political crisis to a military conflict occurred at a federal fort in the harbor of Charleston, South Carolina. Fort Sumter was a United States military installation, but it lay inside the seceded state of South Carolina, which demanded its surrender. Union soldiers at the fort were running low on supplies, creating an immediate crisis for President Lincoln in March 1861. He had to choose, abandon the fort or resupply it, risking an attack. Lincoln chose a middle path. He sent unarmed ships with food and other essential supplies, explicitly not carrying troops or weapons. He told the governor of South Carolina his intentions, shifting the burden of firing the first shot to the Confederacy. Confederate leaders viewed the resupply as aggression. They argued that a U.S. fort in their main harbor threatened their sovereignty. After a final demand for surrender, failed Jefferson Davis ordered General P.G.T. Beauregard to open fire. On the morning of April 12, 1861, Confederate cannons bombarded Fort Sumter. The Union garrison, outnumbered and outgunned, held out for 34 hours. With the fort battered and supplies gone, Major Robert Anderson surrendered. No one died in the bombardment itself, but the attack ignited the Civil War.